The morning briefing came through with coffee still warm in his hands. Rex Torres had been enjoying the quiet of his quarters aboard the research station when the urgent message arrived from the Galactic Council. 3 cups of coffee and 2. Hours later, he found himself packing for a mission he never expected. Another war, he muttered, folding his tactical gear into the regulation case. The Council loved sending humans to observe conflicts these days. Something about their unique perspective, they claimed. Rex suspected they just wanted someone expendable to watch aliens kill each other. The transport bay buzzed with activity as his small crew prepared the stealth ship Silent Dawn. Lieutenant Amy Brooks ran final checks on the sensor array while Operative Tarn calibrated the translation systems. Tarn belonged to a species Rex could never pronounce properly, with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors based on mood. Right now, those colors suggested mild anxiety. The conflict has been active for 6 months, Tarn reported, his translator, giving him a mechanical voice. Both sides have lost significant resources. The Crimson Horde controls the northern continent while the Alterian Federation holds the southern territories and the main mining facilities. Rex nodded while reviewing the mission parameters on his tablet. Tau Meridian looked like every other contested world from orbit, all brown continents and blue oceans. The quantum crystal deposits beneath the surface made it valuable enough to fight over. The fact that people were dying for rocks struck him as typical for galactic politics. Amy finished her checks and approached with a frown. She had served with Rex for 3 years and knew his moods better than most. "Something bothering you about this assignment?" "Standard observation mission," Rex replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. "We watch, we record, we report back. Nobody expects us to do anything else." The launch went smoothly. Silent Dawn slipped away from the research station and jumped to hyperspace with barely a vibration through the hull. Rex used the travel time to study everything the Council had provided about both factions. The Crimson Horde fascinated him in a disturbing way. They operated like ancient human warrior cultures, with strength determining rank and honor meaning everything. Warlord Grimm had held leadership for 5 years by personally defeating every challenger. Their tactics relied on overwhelming force and psychological intimidation. The Alterian Federation presented the opposite approach. Their military structure emphasized collective decision-making and sacrifice for the greater good. Colonel Davis had been elected by his officers rather than appointed by politicians. They fought defensively, protecting civilian populations who had retreated to underground shelters. Classic unstoppable force meets immovable object, Amy observed, reading, over his shoulder. "How long do you think it'll last?" "Not long enough for either side to claim victory," Rex answered. "The Horde has numbers and weapons, but they're fighting far from home. The Alterians have motivation and defensive positions, but they're running out of supplies." Tarn's skin shifted to curious yellow patterns. "The Council believes this conflict will provide valuable intelligence about both species' military capabilities." Rex studied the tactical reports again. Something felt wrong about the whole situation. Both sides had been fighting for 6 months without a decisive battle. Neither commander seemed willing to risk everything on a single engagement. That suggested either both were cowards, which the reports contradicted, or both were trapped by circumstances beyond pure military considerations. The drop from hyperspace brought Tau Meridian into view. Even from high orbit, Rex could see the scars of war across the planet's surface. Smoke rose from a dozen locations, while the northern and southern continents remained clearly divided by a jagged line of destruction. "Take us into the asteroid belt," Rex ordered. "We'll use the mining debris as cover while we set up observation posts." Amy piloted them through the rocky field with practiced ease. The asteroids would hide their presence while giving them clear sight lines to the planet. Rex had learned early in his career that successful observation required patience and the right position. Their first week established the routine. They monitored communications, tracked troop movements, and analyzed tactical patterns. The data confirmed Rex's initial assessment. Warlord Grimm commanded superior forces, but seemed hesitant to press his advantage. Colonel Davis held strong defensive positions, but made no attempt to break out or strike at Horde supply lines. "It's like they're both waiting for something," Amy noted during their third week of observation. "Neither side wants to commit to a decisive battle." Rex had been thinking the same thing. Professional soldiers didn't maintain stalemates without good reason. Either both commanders were incompetent, which their records suggested otherwise, or both faced constraints that weren't obvious from tactical analysis alone. The breakthrough came during the fourth week when Tarn intercepted personal communications between Warlord Grimm and his subordinates. The Horde leader faced challenges to his authority from ambitious underlings who questioned the prolonged campaign. Meanwhile, Colonel Davis dealt with pressure from Altarian civilians who demanded either victory or evacuation. "They're both trapped," Rex realized. Grimm can't retreat without looking weak to his own people. Davis can't abandon the planet without betraying everything his culture stands for. So they keep fighting a war neither can win, Amy concluded. That's going to get a lot of people killed. Rex stared at the planet through the view screen. The Council expected him to observe and report. Standard procedure called for minimal interference with local conflicts. But something about this situation bothered him more than usual. Maybe it was the pointless nature of the fighting, or maybe it was his growing understanding of both commanders' impossible positions. "What if there was a third option?" he asked quietly. Tarn's skin flashed confused purple patterns. "The mission parameters specify observation only." "I know what the parameters say." Rex kept watching the planet. But sometimes observation isn't enough. He had begun to form an idea, something that would require careful timing, detailed cultural knowledge, and a willingness to bend the rules. It went against everything the Council expected from their observers, but it might also save thousands of lives and end a meaningless war. The question was whether he had the courage to try something that had never been done before. The morning routine had become second nature after 5 weeks in orbit. Rex reviewed overnight intelligence reports while Amy tracked supply movements and Tarn monitored communications across 17 different frequencies. But today felt different. Today he planned to dig deeper than standard military analysis allowed. "Pull up everything we have on Crimson Horde's social structure," Rex requested, settling into his chair with fresh coffee. The Silent Dawn's computers hummed quietly as they processed the request. Amy glanced up from her console. "Looking for something specific?" "Cultural pressure points." Rex studied the data as it appeared on his screen. Every military force reflects the society that created it. If we understand how these people think, we might understand why they're really fighting. The Crimson Horde files revealed fascinating details. Their entire civilization revolved around personal strength and dominance hierarchies. Leaders earned their positions through combat, maintained them through displays of power, and lost them the moment they showed weakness. Warlord Grimm had killed 17 challengers in the past 5 years. "Interesting," Rex muttered, cross-referencing the information with battle reports. "Grimm hasn't led a charge personally in the last month. His subordinates are starting to question whether he's lost his edge." Tarn's skin shifted to curious yellow. "How does that affect military operations?" "It means he's trapped between 2 different kinds of warfare," Rex explained. "He needs to show strength to his own people, but he can't risk personal defeat against the Altarians. So he's fighting a cautious campaign that goes against everything his culture values." The Altarian Federation presented a completely different challenge. Their society emphasized collective responsibility and shared sacrifice. Military leaders were chosen for wisdom rather than strength. Colonel Davis had been elected by his officers after the previous commander died in the war's opening battles. Amy pulled up tactical analyses while Rex studied cultural reports. The pattern became clear as they worked through the data together. Every Alterian defensive strategy prioritized civilian protection over military advantage. Davis consistently chose positions that kept Horde forces away from underground shelters, even when those positions were tactically inferior. "He's fighting for his people's survival," Rex observed, "but his government expects him to hold the planet's mining operations. That's forcing him into defensive positions he can't abandon without losing face." The complexity of the situation grew clearer with each passing day. Both commanders faced impossible choices that had nothing to do with pure military strategy. Grimm needed a decisive victory to maintain his leadership, but couldn't risk the personal combat that would prove his strength. Davis needed to protect civilians while holding strategic positions, but lacked the resources to do both effectively. Rex began mapping psychological profiles alongside tactical assessments. He studied communication patterns, decision-making timelines, and leadership styles. What emerged was a picture of two competent commanders trapped by their own culture's expectations. "Look at this," Amy said, pointing to her analysis screen. "Both sides have been reducing patrol frequencies in the neutral zone. It's like they're avoiding contact. Because neither wants to trigger something they can't control," Rex realized. Grimm can't afford a major battle unless he's certain of victory. Davis can't risk losing his defensive positions. Tarn processed this information with visible confusion, his skin cycling through several color combinations. If neither side wishes to fight, why do they continue the conflict? "Because stopping would be worse than continuing," Rex answered. For Grimm, retreat means death at the hands of his own people. For Davis, abandonment means betraying everything his culture believes in. The breakthrough came during the 6th week when Rex intercepted a private communication between Warlord Grimm and his closest advisor. The Horde leader complained about pressure from his subordinates while admitting doubts about the campaign's success. More importantly, he revealed that several rival warlords back on the Horde homeworld were already positioning themselves to challenge his authority. "He's fighting a war on two fronts," Rex told his crew. "The Alterians in front of him and his own people behind him." Similar intelligence about Colonel Davis revealed comparable pressures. The Alterian government demanded results while civilian leaders questioned military spending. Davis faced criticism from both hawks who wanted aggressive action and doves who wanted evacuation. Rex spent hours studying both commanders' psychological profiles. He began to understand their decision-making processes, their cultural constraints, and their personal fears. More importantly, he started to see potential solutions that neither side could reach on their own. What if they both got what they really needed? He asked during a late-night strategy session. "Meaning what?" Amy prompted. "Grimm needs to maintain his reputation for strength. Davis needs to protect his people and fulfill his duty. Both requirements seem incompatible with ending the war, but maybe they're not." Rex pulled up star charts and communication logs. He began sketching possibilities that went far beyond standard military thinking. The idea forming in his mind would require careful manipulation of information, precise timing, and a deep understanding of both cultures' psychological triggers. "You're thinking about intervening," Amy observed. It wasn't a question. "I'm thinking about ending this war before it kills more people unnecessarily," Rex corrected. "The council sent me to observe, but they didn't specify what I should do with my observations." Tarn's skin flashed concerned orange patterns. "Interference with local conflicts violates several council regulations. So does letting thousands of people die in a pointless war," Rex replied. "Besides, who says anything about interference? Maybe I just help both sides see information they already have access to." The plan taking shape in Rex's mind relied on human understanding of psychology, deception, and cultural manipulation. Skills that many alien species considered primitive or beneath their notice. But Rex had learned that sometimes primitive approaches solved complex problems more effectively than sophisticated alternatives. He began detailed preparation for something that had never been attempted before, an end to war through understanding, rather than force, manipulation rather than destruction, and psychology rather than tactics. If it worked, both sides would get what they needed while saving face. If it failed, the war would continue anyway. But Rex had stopped thinking about failure. He had started thinking about victory achieved through means no alien observer would ever consider using. The decision came during the 7th week, while watching another pointless skirmish unfold on the northern border. 3 Horde patrol units had encountered 2 Alterian reconnaissance teams near an abandoned mining station. Both sides exchanged fire for 20 minutes before retreating without casualties or territorial gains. Same pattern as yesterday, Amy reported, monitoring the engagement through long-range sensors. Both sides seem more interested in appearing aggressive than actually fighting. Rex made his choice. Tarn, I need you to map every communication frequency both sides are using. Amy, pull up everything we know about their encryption systems. What are you planning? Amy asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected. Something that violates about 12 different council regulations, Rex admitted. But it might also end this war. The first step required establishing covert access to both sides' communication networks. Rex had spent weeks studying their systems and discovered vulnerabilities that neither faction realized existed. The Crimson Horde relied on strength-based codes that changed daily but followed predictable patterns. The Alterian Federation used collective encryption keys that prioritized shared access over security. Their communication protocols assume they're only fighting each other, Rex explained while Tarn worked on the technical aspects. Neither side considered that a third party might be listening with different capabilities. Within 2 days, they had established monitoring positions throughout both networks. Rex could now observe real-time communications between commanders and subordinates on both sides. More importantly, he could begin introducing carefully crafted information into their intelligence streams. The psychological campaign began with subtle adjustments to reconnaissance reports. Rex identified points where both sides gathered intelligence about enemy movements and started feeding them modified data. Nothing dramatic or obviously false, just small changes that would influence their tactical assumptions. Look at this, he showed Amy his work. Yesterday, the Horde intercepted an Alterian supply convoy report. I modified the numbers slightly to suggest they're receiving more reinforcements than they actually are. Today, the Alterians will intercept a Horde patrol schedule that shows increased activity in sectors where they're not actually operating. You're making each side think the other is stronger than they really are, Amy realized. Exactly. Both commanders are already cautious about committing to major battles. If they believe their opponents are better supplied and more active, they'll become even more careful. The strategy expanded over the following weeks. Rex began crafting intelligence reports that played to each culture's specific fears and assumptions. For the Crimson Horde, he emphasized Alterian defensive preparations and civilian evacuation plans that suggested a prolonged siege. For the Alterian Federation, he highlighted Horde supply shipments and troop rotations that implied a massive offensive was being planned. The beauty of the approach lay in its subtlety. Neither side received obviously false information. Instead, Rex provided carefully selected truths and minor distortions that guided both commanders towards similar conclusions. Each began to believe that their opponent was preparing for a major escalation while secretly planning to withdraw if the situation became untenable. Grimm is starting to question his intelligence reports, Tarn observed during their 3rd week of operations. His subordinates are arguing about conflicting data. Perfect, Rex replied. Confusion breeds caution. The more uncertain he becomes about Alterian capabilities, the less likely he is to risk a major offensive. The psychological pressure increased when Rex began manipulating personal communications. He identified key advisors on both sides and started feeding them information. That suggested their commanders were considering options they hadn't discussed publicly. Nothing dramatic, just enough to create doubt and encourage more conservative planning. Colonel Davis began receiving reports that suggested Warlord Grimm was under pressure from his own people to end the campaign quickly. Meanwhile, Grimm's advisors started hearing rumors that Davis had secret evacuation plans for civilian populations. Both pieces of information were partially true, but Rex's modifications emphasized the aspects that would encourage defensive thinking. "You're turning their own intelligence networks against them," Amy observed. "They're getting accurate information that leads to incorrect conclusions." "I'm helping them see the situation more clearly," Rex corrected. "Both commanders are trapped by their culture's expectations. I'm just showing them that their opponents face similar constraints." The breakthrough came when Rex realized he could use both sides' monitoring systems against each other. He began crafting false communications that he knew would be intercepted. The Horde would overhear fake Alterian discussions about resource shortages. The Alterians would intercept manufactured Horde conversations about supply line problems. Within days, both sides began adjusting their strategies based on this false intelligence. Grimm started consolidating his forces for what he believed would be a desperate Alterian counterattack. Davis began preparing for what looked like a Horde offensive that would overextend their supply lines. "They're both preparing for battles that will never happen," Rex explained to his crew. "But the preparation process is forcing them to think more defensively." The psychological campaign reached its peak when Rex introduced the concept of external threats. He began subtle suggestions that other galactic powers were monitoring the conflict with interest. Not enough to suggest immediate intervention, but sufficient to plant seeds of doubt about the war's long-term consequences. "Both commanders are starting to realize that this conflict isn't happening in isolation," Rex noted while reviewing intercepted communications. "They're beginning to consider how their actions might affect their civilization's standings with other galactic powers." The final piece of the strategy involved creating false evidence of coordination between external observers. Rex carefully crafted communications that suggested multiple alien species were analyzing the conflict for their own strategic purposes. Again, this information was partially true, but Rex's presentation emphasized the aspects that would make both commanders uncomfortable about continuing the war. "You've managed to make them both paranoid about the same things," Amy realized. "They're starting to see this conflict as a performance for a galactic audience rather than a private war." "Which changes everything," Rex agreed. "Pride might force them to continue fighting each other, but pride might also force them to avoid looking foolish in front of more powerful civilizations." The psychological pressure had built to a critical point. Both commanders were receiving intelligence that suggested their opponents were stronger than expected, more desperate than assumed, and being watched by external powers with their own agendas. Neither could afford to appear weak, but both were beginning to question whether the war served their civilization's long-term interests. Rex prepared for the next phase of his plan. He had successfully manipulated both sides into defensive postures based on incomplete information. Now he needed to provide them with a face-saving way to end the conflict that would satisfy their cultural requirements while achieving his strategic objectives. The pieces fell into place during the 9th week, when both commanders made decisions that Rex had been carefully orchestrating. Warlord Grimm ordered increased reconnaissance flights over Alterian positions, while Colonel Davis authorized expanded patrol routes along the neutral zone. Neither realized they were following a script written by their human observer. "Phase 2 begins now," Rex announced to his crew. "We're going to give both sides exactly what they think they want to know." The Silent Dawn moved closer to the planet, using asteroid cover to position advanced holographic projectors. Rex had spent days calculating optimal placement for equipment that could generate false sensor readings across multiple spectrum ranges. The technology existed for legitimate survey work, but Rex intended to use it for something far more creative. "Are you sure this will work?" Amy asked, while calibrating the projection systems. If either side detects the deception, they'll know someone is manipulating them. They won't detect it because they'll be seeing what they expect to see, Rex replied. Both commanders are already primed to believe that external forces are monitoring this conflict. We're just going to make that belief visible. The first projections appeared at the edge of the solar system during the 10th week. Massive energy signatures that suggested approaching spacecraft, but positioned too far away for detailed scanning. Rex had designed them to be detectable by both sides' sensor arrays while remaining mysterious enough to encourage speculation rather than immediate action. Perfect, he observed while monitoring both factions' responses. Grimm's people are interpreting the signatures as possible Alterian reinforcements. Davis's staff thinks they might be Horde reserve fleets. Tarn's skin showed nervous purple patterns. What happens when they realize the signatures don't match either faction's ship designs? That's when things get interesting, Rex answered. Over. The following days, Rex adjusted the projections to suggest a fleet configuration that matched neither Crimson Horde nor Alterian Federation standards. The ships appeared larger and more advanced than anything either side possessed. Their approach vector suggested they were interested in the planet, but not necessarily aligned with either faction. Both commanders responded predictably. Grimm sent long-range scouts to investigate while keeping his main forces in defensive positions. Davis ordered increased surveillance while preparing contingency plans for multiple scenarios. Neither wanted to be caught unprepared by unknown vessels with superior technology. They're both thinking the same thing, Rex noted, while reviewing intercepted communications. Someone else wants this planet, and neither faction is prepared to fight a three-way war. The psychological pressure increased when Rex began broadcasting false communications between the approaching ships and unknown recipients. The messages used encryption that neither side could break completely, but both could partially decode. The fragments they managed to translate suggested the newcomers were evaluating both factions for possible alliance or elimination. Brilliant, Amy admitted reluctantly. You're making them both realize that their private war has attracted unwanted attention from more powerful forces. Rex refined the deception by adding tactical details that both sides would recognize as advanced military doctrine. The approaching fleet demonstrated coordination and technology that neither the Horde nor the Federation could match. More importantly, their communications suggested they viewed the current conflict as a minor inconvenience that might require management. The masterstroke came when Rex orchestrated seemingly accidental encounters between reconnaissance units from both sides. He used the projections to guide patrol routes so that Horde and Alterian scouts would encounter each other while investigating the approaching fleet. Instead of fighting, both groups found themselves comparing notes about the mysterious ships. Look, at this, Rex showed his crew the intercepted communications. A Horde patrol leader just shared sensor data with an Alterian reconnaissance team. They're cooperating because they're both worried about the same threat. The false threat had achieved, something that months of warfare couldn't accomplish. Both sides were beginning to see each other as potential allies against a superior enemy rather than eternal enemies fighting over territory. Rex enhanced the effect by gradually revealing more details about the approaching fleet. The ships appeared to be conducting detailed surveys of the planet while maintaining defensive formations that suggested they were prepared for resistance. Their technology demonstrated capabilities that made both existing factions seem primitive by comparison. Time for the final revelation, Rex announced during the 11th week. Both commanders need to understand what they're really facing. The climactic moment arrived when Rex allowed both sides to intercept a fabricated communication between the fleet commander and an unknown authority. The message discussed the approaching planet in terms of strategic resources and existing population management. It suggested that current occupants were considered expendable if they interfered with extraction operations. Within hours, both Warlord Grimm and Colonel Davis were reviewing the same intelligence and reaching similar conclusions. Their private war had attracted the attention of a galactic power that viewed both factions as obstacles to be removed. Neither the Crimson Horde nor the Alterian Federation possessed the military strength to resist such an advanced force alone. Perfect timing, Rex observed while monitoring command communications. Both sides are realizing they need to end their conflict before dealing with a bigger threat. The psychological transformation was remarkable to witness. Grimm began consulting with advisors about defensive alliances, while Davis considered evacuation procedures for civilian populations. Neither commander wanted to appear weak to their subordinates, but both recognized the futility of continuing their war while external forces planned intervention. Rex provided the final push by demonstrating the approaching fleet's scanning capabilities. His projections showed the ships conducting detailed analysis of both factions' military assets, defensive positions, and resource extraction capabilities. The scans were thorough enough to suggest complete tactical awareness without being obvious. About artificial origins. They know everything about both sides now, Amy reported while tracking the false sensor readings. Troop strengths, defensive positions, supply routes, everything. Which means both commanders understand that their strategic secrets are worthless, Rex added. The approaching fleet knows exactly how to defeat either faction individually or both together. The final psychological piece fell into place when intercepted communications suggested the fleet was preparing landing operations within days. Both sides detected what appeared to be invasion preparation, including atmospheric entry vehicles and ground assault equipment. The timeline was aggressive enough to suggest the newcomers expected minimal resistance. Warlord Grimm and Colonel Davis faced identical realizations. Their months of warfare had weakened both factions while external. Observers gathered intelligence for conquest. Neither could win their original conflict and defend against superior forces simultaneously. Pride demanded resistance, but survival required cooperation. Rex prepared for the final phase of his plan. Both commanders were primed to consider options they would never have accepted weeks earlier. The false threat had created conditions where negotiation appeared necessary for survival rather than weakness. Now he needed to provide them with a face-saving way to end their war while maintaining their honor and authority. The morning of the 12th week brought the message Rex had been orchestrating for months. Warlord Grimm transmitted a coded request to Colonel Davis, suggesting they meet under a flag of truce, not to negotiate surrender, but to discuss their mutual response to the approaching threat. Davis accepted within hours. Both commanders think this meeting was their idea, Rex explained, while positioning the Silent Dawn for optimal observation. Grimm believes he's demonstrating strength by taking initiative. Davis thinks he's fulfilling his duty to protect civilian populations. Amy monitored the communications as both sides arranged the meeting logistics. They've chosen the abandoned mining station in the neutral zone. Minimal escort forces, standard diplomatic protocols. Perfect location, Rex agreed. Isolated enough for private conversation, neutral enough that neither side loses face by going there. The meeting took place 3 days later under circumstances that Rex had carefully arranged. Both commanders arrived with small escort forces and established temporary camps on opposite sides of the mining station. Rex watched through advanced sensors as they conducted their preliminary negotiations. Warlord Grimm looked exactly as Rex had expected from intelligence photos. Tall, muscular, covered in ritual scars that marked his victories in personal combat. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight, but carried tension that suggested he understood the stakes of this particular encounter. Colonel Davis presented a complete contrast. Average height, calm demeanor, wearing practical military clothing instead of ceremonial armor. He studied the situation carefully before committing to any action, weighing options the way a professional soldier considers tactical alternatives. They're both scared, Rex observed while listening to their initial conversation through hidden sensors. Not of each other, but of the approaching fleet. The first hour of negotiations proceeded exactly as Rex had planned. Both commanders shared intelligence about the mysterious ships, while carefully avoiding any discussion of their ongoing war. They treated each other as fellow military professionals facing a common threat, rather than enemies forced into temporary cooperation. Rex activated the final phase of his deception during the second hour of meetings. He generated new sensor readings that suggested the approaching fleet had accelerated its timeline and would arrive within days, rather than weeks. Both commanders received the updated intelligence simultaneously through their respective communication networks. The pressure just increased dramatically, Amy noted while monitoring both camps' reactions. Their advisors are recommending immediate defensive preparations, which neither side can accomplish while fighting each other, Rex added. Time for the revelation that ties everything together. The masterstroke came when Rex allowed his presence to be detected. Not dramatically or obviously, but through carefully planned sensor readings that suggested a cloaked observer had been monitoring the planet throughout the conflict. He made it appear that both factions had discovered the observer independently through their enhanced surveillance during the crisis. Within minutes, both commanders were reviewing identical intelligence that confirmed a Galactic Council observation. Vessel had been present throughout their war. The timing suggested that the approaching fleet and the Council observer were connected, possibly coordinating for some larger strategic purpose. Brilliant, Tarn observed, his skin showing impressed. Green patterns. They think you're part of the threat rather than the solution. Not yet, Rex corrected. But they're about to realize that their war has been performed for an audience with its own agenda. Rex revealed himself during the third hour of negotiations by transmitting a standard council identification signal. Both commanders received the transmission simultaneously, confirming that a human observer had been monitoring their conflict since its beginning. The timing suggested that his presence was connected to the approaching fleet. The psychological impact was immediate and decisive. Both Grimm and Davis realized they had been fighting a war under observation by forces they couldn't challenge, militarily. Their private conflict had become a performance evaluated by external powers for unknown purposes. Rex requested permission to join the negotiations under standard Galactic Council protocols. Both commanders agreed, partly because they needed information about the approaching fleet, and partly because they understood that refusing would make them appear weak to a superior force. The meeting that followed accomplished everything Rex had planned while exceeding his expectations for elegance and efficiency. He explained his role as a council observer without revealing the extent of his manipulation. The approaching fleet, he suggested, represented Council intervention forces responding to the prolonged conflict. The Council has determined that this war serves no productive purpose, Rex told both commanders. The approaching fleet has orders to establish a neutral zone and protect strategic resources from further damage. Warlord Grimm responded exactly as Rex had predicted. My forces will not surrender to external intervention. The Crimson Horde has never retreated from righteous conquest. Nor will the Alterian Federation abandon our duty to protect these settlements, Colonel Davis added. We cannot allow civilian populations to suffer under foreign occupation. Rex had anticipated both responses and prepared his solution accordingly. The Council doesn't require surrender from either faction. We require strategic withdrawal to prevent unnecessary casualties during the establishment of neutral zone protocols. The genius of Rex's approach became clear as both commanders processed this information. Neither was being asked to surrender to their enemy or admit defeat in their war. Instead, both were being offered the opportunity to make strategic decisions that protected their people from superior external forces. Your war has demonstrated the courage and capability of both civilizations, Rex continued. The Council recognizes that prolonged conflict between equals serves no one's interests, while external threats remain active in this sector. Rex had crafted his language to appeal to both cultures simultaneously. Grimm could frame withdrawal as a strategic decision that preserved his forces for more important battles. Davis could present cooperation as fulfilling his duty to protect civilians from greater threats. The negotiation process took 6 hours, but the outcome had been determined by months of psychological preparation. Both commanders agreed to establish a ceasefire while the Council fleet secured the planet. Neither would lose face by surrendering to their enemy because both were making the same decision for the same strategic reasons. "The Crimson Horde will withdraw to preserve our strength for battles that matter," Grimm announced to his subordinates. "This planet offers insufficient glory to justify continued losses. The Alterian Federation has successfully defended our positions until diplomatic support arrived." Davis told his officers, "Our duty is fulfilled while civilian populations remain protected." Rex watched both factions implement withdrawal procedures with remarkable efficiency. Neither side had wanted to continue the war, but both had been trapped by cultural expectations and political pressures. His deception had provided them with acceptable reasons to end a conflict that served no one's interests. The False Council fleet began its withdrawal 3 days later, using the same holographic projections that had created it. Rex reported the successful resolution to the actual Galactic Council with careful omissions about his methods. The war had ended without additional casualties, both civilizations had preserved their honor, and valuable resources had been protected. "Mission accomplished," Amy observed while preparing the Silent Dawn for departure. "You ended a 6-month war without firing a shot." Rex reviewed his final reports while considering the implications of what he had achieved. Human understanding of psychology, culture, and deception had accomplished something that superior technology and firepower could never have managed. Both sides had gotten what they really needed while believing they had made the decisions themselves. The Council will want to know how this happened, Tarn noted while preparing communications equipment. "Simple," Rex replied. "I observed the conflict carefully and reported accurately on the cultural factors that influenced both factions' decision-making processes. Everything else was just good timing and effective communication." The Silent Dawn departed Tau Meridian, with both factions implementing peaceful withdrawal procedures. Rex had prevented thousands of casualties while demonstrating the effectiveness of psychological warfare over conventional military approaches. His success would become legendary among Council observers, though few would understand the methods. That made it possible. Human intuition had ended an alien war through understanding rather than force, manipulation rather than destruction, and wisdom rather than weapons.